It's not that we're not smart enough or that we're not good enough or that we don't know enough. That is not the issue. The issue is that the system is not ready for us. So I have come 180 to the place where if I ever start to feel like I don't know enough, I just remind myself, that's okay. I don't need to know everything. I don't need to be the best at everything, but I need to be open and I need to ask questions so that I can keep elevating and keep moving myself up in the conversation or in the subject matter that I'm trying to master in that moment. But I have come to wholly reject imposter syndrome. Um, not I'm not discrediting that it exists, but we have to do the work internally to get ourselves to the space to realize that it has nothing to do with us. It is actually the system that's created that.
Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of. Together, I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. Welcome back to Alvina Talks Shift. We're ramping up now for the end of the year. There's a lot of things going on politically, and obviously in our spaces we're hearing about crazy things happening in the news. But I want to focus today's episode on kind of as women, as Latinas, as people that are professional, there's shifts going on in our life all of the time. And there's shifts that happen that change the trajectory of our life. And there's shifts that happen that might seem big at the time and end up not being anything. So I can't gatekeep. I have one of the best friends in the world. Her name is Olivia Mendoza. I remember the day that we met. And then I only remember being best friends from there. So I don't even know how we became best friends. I just know the moment we met, we were best friends and linked for life. Olivia, I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Alvina. I'm so excited and so proud of you.
Thank you. Olivia and I met in 2012. She was working on redistricting at the time, which was one of her major accomplishments. Over the weekend, I watched this movie called, I think it was A Million Miles Away. It's about the Latino astronaut that comes from farm workers, and his family makes sacrifice for him. He holds his guilt, and he ends up, meeting his goals. Olivia, you have a similar background. You come from an agriculture family who's rooted here in Wyoming and Colorado in the Southwest. And the trajectory of your life is completely different than what anybody probably in your family could have imagined. So let's talk about what it was like growing up and how you look at it now from where you are today.
Yes, thanks, Alvina. I actually watched that movie this weekend also with my kids because I think it's so important, right, that they understand the struggle that our community has generationally had in this country, but that is not over. And in fact, is reflected in their mother. So,
Yeah.
as you said, I was actually born in Mexico, in Chihuahua, and came to this country as an infant, or was brought to this country as an infant. And so I spent most of my childhood as an undocumented child. And that reality carries a lot of burden and fear that is difficult to put into words for someone that hasn't experienced that. But last summer, I took the kids back to Chihuahua, to Mexico, to the little town that I was born in, Los Leones, and it was in August of last year. And we stood outside of the, one room adobe house that I was born in because there's no hospitals. The closest hospital is hours and hours away. And I had them really reflect on that moment because almost a month later, a case that we have spearheaded here at my organization, the National Redistricting Foundation, was going to be heard at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I just told my kids, look at this casita. This is where I was born. And next month, I'm going to be on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court because I felt like, talk about a seismic shift, right, from the world that you are potentially born into, but with the sacrifices of your parents and your family and your loved ones and your support network, you can really accomplish your dreams. And I think the kids understood what I was trying to tell them, but even more so, tying it back to the movie, when we saw A Million Miles Away, I talked to the kids about those visuals, the images on the screen of the farm workers, and the kids really seem to understand, like, is that how you grew up? Is that the images of your childhood? And it was. My father was a rancher in Wyoming because he was a rancher when we lived in Chihuahua. And although I don't have memories of working in the fields, I know that my parents had us with them, like sitting under a tree or waiting for them to finish their work. And all of that is almost unbelievable now, to think that that was in one lifetime, the shift and the changes, that now my family reaps the benefit of having had the privilege of being not just receiving a citizenship to the US and becoming a US citizen, but also access to education, which in my mind is the equalizer and what really changed my ability to be successful.
How has your life experience shaped how you look at policy and how you experience the community and the politics around us?
It's interesting. That's such an interesting question, and I get this question a lot in a different form. I'm often asked, why do you do this work? Why did you sacrifice everything you had to go to law school and now pursue redistricting, um, or redistricting law? And what it comes down to for me, Alvina, honestly, is it is not a choice for me. This is my responsibility. When I became a US citizen, it was because there was a stranger, or many, many strangers, somewhere, changing policy, advocating for me, this little, farm girl in Wyoming, that I didn't know these strangers, but they committed to making public policy that actually lived up to the ideals of this country. And the day I became a US citizen, I felt like in that moment, it was like embedded in my heart, like just emboldened me to become that person for future generations. I don't know the individuals that are, sort of benefiting from the change in policy that we're advocating for, but I do know that it's changing the trajectory of their lives, just like someone did for me when I was a young girl. So I think the key for me is it's it is very embedded in my DNA, because I saw everything my parents sacrificed and everything that my brother and sisters have done to advance, in their lives. And I just feel like we have, as a community, that responsibility to each other to, it's such a cliche, right? But to reach back, to leave the door open, to push, help people up the ladder, whatever you want to say. It is not a choice. It is a responsibility.
So how, and your kids are a lot older now. I think they're kind of in the mental state where these things are realities, right? And how they interact with their friends and how they're interacting in their community. What, how do you see them? How did you get them to feel that? How have you embedded that in how you're raising them and how you're teaching them about our history and why we're here?
I think for me, it was a real conscious decision that I wanted to raise my kids with as much honesty that I possibly could, given their age, right? So obviously you're going to talk to a child that's 2 or 3 years old about the world around them in a very different way than you're going to talk to your children like mine, who are teenagers now. And when I was growing up, I didn't know that I was undocumented until I was applying for college. I knew we were scared. I knew my family did very little things in the community outside of the church. Like, all of that was my lived reality, but I didn't understand why. And I don't begrudge my parents, that approach that they took, because I think in that generation, it was very much like, these are adult things. These are not for the kids to have to worry about or be concerned with. But growing up and not really understanding why you're so different from the people around you, it shapes you. And I didn't want my kids to grow up not understanding the privilege they were born into simply because they have two educated parents. And so I try really hard every time there is a moment in the news that is, um, important to world events, like we've seen happen over the course of the last, you know, 5, 10 years. At least in the sense that my kids are able to understand what's happening. I talk to them all of the time. What does this mean? Why did this happen? But more importantly, what systems were in place that allowed for this to happen? Because what I really want the kids to grow up, no matter what they do, who they become, it's important to me that they understand that there are systems at work in our realities, and they should not be immune to that just because they're not always impacted by those systems, right? They're never going to have the challenge of being undocumented, of being monolinguals, like
Yeah.
the kids speak and understand, the both languages. They're not never going to have the challenge of having parents who don't understand how to navigate systems in this country. But that should not make them unaware that there are families, and in fact was my experience. So I think for me, Alvina, it just came from this place of wanting my kids to choose who they want to be, but to know what world they're operating inside of. And it's tricky. Sometimes it's hard. There's a lot of bad things that happen, and I've had parents say, "Oh, I wouldn't talk to my kids about that. I don't want them to be scared or worried." But I think you just have to know who you're talking to, know, the proverbial know your audience, um, and be able to explain life events in a way that's meaningful and at their age appropriate level.
So later on in life, you decided to make a big change in the trajectory of your career. Let's talk about that. How did you come to that point? What were the challenges that you were afraid of? How did you overcome those challenges? And then how did you get through it?
It's funny because I almost always reflect on those moments where I made this decision, because I was a successful, executive director of a nonprofit. And at the time, I was working and leading a government agency when I made the decision to leave and go to law school. And I had a lot of people, good people that care about me and that wanted the best for me, tell me, don't do that, don't do that, don't get off this train. You're on a good train. You just stay here. You're going to be successful. But Alvina goes all the way back to that story of my childhood and knowing that there were people making policy changes that impacted my life. And that drive, that burn, it just never went away. So when we met, I was the executive director of Claro, and I was working on redistricting here in Colorado. And I really started to understand the power that redistricting has in setting our political landscape. And secondarily, I started to understand how little of a voice Latinos had in that power structure. And it shook me. It really rattled my sense of power to make change in this world. And I started to really dig into redistricting. And I was a key witness in the trial. And I remember vividly sitting in the courtroom, looking at all of those attorneys. And I thought to myself, I can do that. They don't know more than I know. And that was, talk about a shift in my
Yeah.
mentality. I always thought, attorneys and lawyers, like they were born for it. And here I was, this undocumented child born in this one bedroom home in Chihuahua. Like, this can't be my story. Um, but I just took step by step. And I'll tell you that I was scared every step of the way, every step of the way. Leaving a career when I, had financial responsibilities, married with 2 children, and choosing to just completely change uh, what I was going to do in my life, it came with a lot of fear and a lot of stress, a lot of burden, not just on myself, but on my whole family, on my husband, on the kids, on my mom, my sisters, my brother, everyone. I mean, quite honestly, my closest friends, the ones that helped me carry the burden and the stress. So I think it's important to note that, because those type of life decisions, don't happen in a vacuum, and you don't succeed in a vacuum. Like, you
Yeah.
need your community to get you through that. So I feel I would be untruthful if I said, oh, it was not a big deal, it was fine. No, I was scared every moment, studying for the LSAT, applying for the law schools, trying to figure out financially how I was going to pay for law school, actually being successful in law school, understanding how to succeed in law school is a whole, it's just a whole nother conversation. And honestly, the trauma of studying the law for people of color is something that we don't always talk about, because the truth is that the legal system was set up and created by the existing power structures. And so you're really um, thrown and immersed into a system that is not designed to serve, the most vulnerable communities, even though that's not what we think, right? We think justice is blind. But the way in law school, you really start to understand that is, in fact, not the case. So all of that was scary and hard. And then to be looking for a job in my 40s, with a law degree,
Yeah.
nerve wracking. I hadn't applied for a job and I can't think of how many years at that point. But the struggle was worth it. Obviously, I was able to reach a place of a lot of success, not just personally and professionally, but in the work I'm trying to do, right? The purpose and the impact of choosing to become a lawyer, and specifically to be involved in redistricting litigation. So I I was scared all of the time, and I'm thankful that I was scared enough to keep that adrenaline, but not so scared that I chose to walk away.
One of the most important conversations we had, I remember when I jumped over from broadcasting to the policy and political side, was how do you go to bed at night? I mean, you're just like you said, it's so traumatic to learn about how these systems are set up, not for us. And you start listening to the news in a different way. You start understanding, like you said, these people making decisions that are completely out of that makes you feel like it's completely out of your hands. And I remember asking you, how do you go to sleep at night? Like, how do you not want to like save everything, save everybody, save everything? What's your advice to folks that are, especially in the past couple of weeks, seeing these very big political issues happening? People are getting hurt. Individuals are in our own country are, unhoused. We see these communities building on the streets around us. What do you do? What's your like mental training or breathing? Like, what are your tools to get through that, to take it in and then like let it go?
For me, I think where I first started to struggle with this feeling of like the problems in our world are so overwhelming that what can I, is this like one little person, do? I started to feel that when I was in law school. So I'm not saying that I didn't feel that before, but I think when I was in law school, I really felt the magnitude of it. And to put some of this in context, I started in law school in August of 2016. So 3 months later was the presidential election that, in my mind, seismic shifts for our
Yeah.
country, really changed the direction of our country. And so I was studying the law under that sort of cloud over our democratic process. Where I found inspiration is actually looking to our history and looking back and realizing that if not us, then who? If I There were times that I thought maybe I'll just go and practice, trust and estates law or something that is not so mentally and emotionally taxing, but I wouldn't be able to look in the mirror. And I think that's the way I answer that question about how do you go to bed at night. It's because when I wake up and I look in the mirror, I am who I want to see in that mirror. And the day that I look in the mirror and I don't like who or what I'm seeing, that's when I can't go to bed. But I think that we have to remember that everything we're experiencing feels and is horrific and historical and unprecedented, and all the words we've heard described. But that was true, of the freedom riders.
Yeah.
of, you know, the women that really led so many movements to bring us, even if it feels incremental, but to bring us the change that we see today. And, you know, I think that not losing sight that we are here on, that we stand on the shoulders of giants in the indigenous communities and the Latino communities, the Black community. There's so many powerful historical um, models, role models, heroes to look to. I am not suggesting at all that we are, that I'm equating myself to that. What I'm saying is that that's where I get my motivation to keep going, because I can't imagine what all of those individuals felt, you know, picketing
Right.
when you needed to put food on the table for your family, but you refused to you know, work on the conditions that they did in the farm workers movement. And I mean, those are real life struggles that I try as much as I possibly can to remind myself about, so that it puts this moment in time into perspective of what we're fighting for.
Okay, so this is something that you and I have talked about in the past, and I'm going to bring it up because I think it's important for us in our generation to talk about imposter syndrome. This is something that a lot of young people are using when they feel uncomfortable in spaces, when they don't feel welcome in spaces. And I'll share my take, but let's start with your take. What is your take on imposter syndrome?
Oh, wow. That is a complicated and layered question. I'll start with, I believe imposter syndrome is real. You know, lots of individuals, including myself, have struggled with that and have tried to, um, you know, find ways to cope with this feeling of like not being enough. But I have come to the place in my life where I realize that what I show up with every single day, my intellectual capacity, my heart, my commitment, my humanity, it is enough. In fact, it is probably more than enough. And so I, imposter syndrome to me is the outcome, is the impact of a system that's designed to not serve us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? When you look at our institutions and you see one or two women of color, you know, one or two, you know, women in positions of power, how can you not sit there and think, oh, maybe I don't deserve this, or maybe I'm not smart enough? But the more time I have spent in this work, that's not the problem. It's not that we're not smart enough or that we're not good enough or that we don't know enough. That is not the issue. The issue is that the system is not ready for us. So I have come, you know, 180 to the place where if I ever start to feel like I don't know enough, I just remind myself that's okay. I don't need to know everything. I don't need to be the best at everything, but I need to be open and I need to ask questions so that I can keep elevating and keep moving myself um, up in the conversation or in the subject matter that I'm trying to master in that moment. But I have come to wholly reject imposter syndrome. Um, not I'm not discrediting that it exists, but we have to do the work internally to get ourselves to the space to realize that it has nothing to do with us. It is actually the system that's created that.
I mean, I agree. I feel like imposter syndrome is a name for something that we didn't have a name for before, which is feeling inadequate in spaces of leadership, or maybe not, maybe just in spaces we're unfamiliar with. But I think that how you cope with that, how you deal with that, and how you overcome that, and understanding you're never going to overcome it. You're probably not going to feel adequate in a lot of different spaces at a lot of different times throughout your life. Even as a mom, as a new mom, sometimes I feel like an imposter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can't blame my son for that. For that. So I agree. I validate the feelings, but as opposed to using it as um, a crutch or a reasoning for why I'm not successful, I don't agree with. I think that I'm not saying everybody does that, but I think it when you put a name on it or you label it, it becomes a very present obstacle, as opposed to, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's helpful to see things as microaggressions so that you can get over the microaggressions really easily so you can take on the big aggressions. But I feel like a lot of the microaggressions and everything that you and I have experienced through our life probably have already been talked about ad nauseum. We know they exist, and we kind of have to just like get over it and move on so that we ourselves can be successful, because we can only control our own destiny.
That's right. And I actually would even go one step further and say, and call it to attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those microaggressions are real, and I will give you an example. I worked at this place, and every time I would speak, the director of the organization would interrupt me mid sentence every time, even though the question is being asked of me. This person made me feel small, made me feel like even though the question's being asked of me, I didn't deserve to answer. And so I had a private conversation with this individual, not in the meeting, not, with everyone else there present, because I genuinely believed that it was so ingrained in his mind, he wasn't even aware of what he was doing. Because this was a person much beloved by the community, and he looked at me stunned when we had the conversation. Apologetic, really shocked, I think, that I had called it to his attention. And I said, I just want you to know that when you do this to me, this is how I feel. That I don't believe that I am small or that my voice doesn't matter, but this is the feeling that rises up inside of me when you treat me like this. I can tell you it never happened again. He never interrupted my conversation. So it is about recognizing it, acknowledging it in the best way that you can, confronting it, and then moving on. I didn't hold it against him. He and I ended up working and having a great working relationship. Did he have a newfound respect for me? Probably. Did my respect for him actually change a little bit? Yeah, it did. But it didn't stop us from doing good work together. And I think that all of that can exist, all of that can be true at the same time. And allowing ourselves to move out of sort of a binary way of looking at our relationships, our professional relationships, is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And looking at the social capital that surrounds you to advance you to the next stage of your life or your career or whatever that may be, and how you overcome, like you said, you talked it out, you had the confidence in yourself to say, okay, this is enough. I have to address it in the most appropriate way so that you can have that, continue to have that relationship, which has been, I'm sure, very beneficial to you in the community, because now you're an attorney working on these very important policies, whereas, sometimes those relationships get blown up and then who knows what happens. So I think that that's something that, that's my advice to younger women and younger women of color is we have to acknowledge the microaggressions. We, like you said, we are enough when we show up. We are more than, we are actually more than enough, because we are required to overeducate ourselves and overthink everything. We are set up that way because of the way that the system is built. And so I guess my advice is, you can call it imposter syndrome if you want, but you should really think about how you are going to overcome it to get through the next step. Because if you decide not to apply for a job because you feel like you're not going to fit in, then you're the one, you're losing out on that opportunity. Somebody's going to fill that spot. And so we can't let these labels hold us back. We just validate them and then, go on with our own destiny.
Yeah, acknowledge them and then move forward.
So we're almost at the end here, but we have a few more minutes. Let's talk a little bit about what you are actually working on. This is like us having dinner together, but let's talk about your actual, your actual important work that's going on, because the future of the Supreme Court is, really important for our country and the trajectory of the next 100 years. So what are you working on? what's up next?
I think you hit it, the nail on the head. The Supreme Court's role in the future of our democracy is really, really important. And I say that with some degree of concern because I think we have seen this court behave in a way that we have never seen, whether it's a liberal leaning or conservative leaning court, we have never seen a court show up in each term with a very clear agenda to undo the will of the people. And it hurts me a little bit, Alvina, to say that because even though going to law school and learning the law was a very difficult and traumatic experience for me, I am an attorney and it is my professional oath to lift up this system, right? That is what I am committed to do. But thankfully, the court saw reason in a landmark case that we argued. Our organization helped sponsor and develop the legal strategy for the case that went to the US Supreme Court last year and was decided this year over the summer. Many people call it the Alabama voting rights case. It is Allen v. Milligan. And the reason why this case was so important and shapes the landscape of our fight in the future is because this court had been on a march since Shelby v. Holder, which was in 2013, to undo the protections afforded to us under the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act that is credited for, enfranchising and giving power to the voice of, millions of individuals and voters of color across this country. This court really wanted to put an end to that. And they finally stopped what I consider to be very bad behavior this last term when they ended up upholding Section 2 of the Voting Rights, essentially saying, this is important legislation, and we will continue to have Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act as a tool in our toolbox to be able to fight bad actors that are diluting the votes of communities of color. And that is exactly what the state of Alabama tried to do in this case, and they lost. And they lost many times. Every court that they went to and appealed to, all the way up to the US Supreme Court, told them, no, you cannot dilute the voice of Black voters. That is in violation of the Voting Rights Act. And really, Alvina, to be even a small part of that win is any lawyer's dream. And that's why I say that the fight and the struggle and the difficulty of going to law school and passing the bar exam and becoming a licensed attorney, and then to find myself in this role as the director of litigation and policy was beyond my wildest dreams. And I feel grateful that the court faithfully applied the law, but I also recognize that the fight is far from over. Just this morning I was listening to the Supreme Court's hearing on a different case coming out of South Carolina, and it's evident that the fight for our voting rights is we still have to keep up that fight.
I don't think we don't even think of that. It's only a generation away. My dad turned 18 when people of color were allowed to vote. It's not that far in our history when we didn't have the right to vote. So, but I also, to congratulate you, Olivia, if you think about where our country is headed and where your professional career is headed, I feel better knowing that you're part of that and you're fighting that, because I think that there's a lot of work to do, both at the grassroots, the grass tops, all the levels that you've worked on. I feel like your experience is going to really move a lot of people in the right direction and get us hopefully back on the right path.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Alvina, because it is not just lawyers. It's not just this movement. When I think about movement lawyering and the type of work that I'm engaged in, it is absolutely the community, right? The grassroots, the voices, the organizing, all of the power that comes from us actually showing up. And I don't just mean voting. Voting is like baseline. I mean us actually showing up and exerting our power in the spaces that we need to do so. That is what fuels this movement. And so I am thankful and humbled to be just, one little speck of sand on this whole beach of work. So I hope to continue that fight.
Well, I think our time's up, unfortunately.
Oh.
I know, that was so much fun. We'll have to do it again and talk about
It
other
went
fun
so fast.
family stuff. All right. Well, thank you, Olivia. I hope you have a great week and keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Alvina.
Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalkshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.